Price enters this hour already carrying unresolved structure from multiple prior sessions. The February 9th U.S. session anchor forms directly at the lower boundary of the long-term Bollinger Band. That placement is not isolated, and it is not accidental. It coincides precisely with the upper boundary of the February 6th U.S. session anchor, while also overlapping the lower boundary of the February 5th U.S. session anchor. This creates a layered junction where price has already been processed from both directions. Nothing here is new. What matters is that price has returned to the same zone without releasing volatility. At this stage, both the long-term and short-term Bollinger Bands are flat. There is no upward curvature and no downward curvature. Flat bands indicate that volatility is not expressing, it is being absorbed. When Bollinger Bands stop sloping and begin moving sideways, the market is no longer discovering new conditions. It is negotiating within conditions that already exist. Time becomes the dominant variable. The 20-period moving average also flattens. This signals that short-term acceptance has stopped accelerating. Price is no longer pulling the average upward or downward with urgency. At the same time, the 120-period moving average continues to descend. The distance between the 20 and the 120 moving averages is shrinking. This is not because price is moving strongly, but because time is compressing their relationship. When moving averages converge without price expansion, their role changes. They stop functioning as directional references. They begin functioning as a shared equilibrium zone. In this environment, each new candle carries less range than the previous one. The hourly volatility continues to contract. Reduced range does not indicate calm, it indicates containment. Price is not traveling distance. It is spending time inside structure. Time spent inside compression increases dependency on surrounding references. Nothing resolves quickly because nothing is allowed to move freely. Each hour adds weight without displacement. RSI during this phase reflects the same condition. Momentum does not accelerate, and it does not collapse. It oscillates shallowly, reinforcing the idea that participation exists without commitment. This is not balance. Balance would require rotation with range. This is persistence without resolution. What is important here is not where price is positioned, but how many structural references are converging into a narrow time-based zone. Multiple U.S. session anchors, flat Bollinger Bands, and compressing moving averages are all describing the same condition from different angles. Structure is not expanding outward. It is folding inward. And as long as price remains accepted inside this compression, every additional hour increases internal tension without visible movement. Now attention shifts to the February 9th Asia session anchor. This Asia session anchor forms above the 20-period moving average, but with significantly reduced volatility. The candle body is narrow, and the range is compressed. Participation is present, but expression is minimal. This anchor does not push price away from structure. It settles inside it. The location of this Asia session anchor is critical. It forms beneath the upper boundary of the February 9th U.S. session anchor. It also sits beneath the upper boundary of the February 5th U.S. session anchor, while aligning with the mid to lower region of the February 8th Asia session anchor. This places the Asia session anchor inside a dense overlap of prior session memory. It is not establishing a new zone. It is reinforcing an existing one. When a session anchor forms inside overlapping references, it does not create direction. It increases structural density. Density makes resolution slower and more expensive in time. Throughout this period, the Bollinger Bands remain flat. There is no expansion, no widening, and no curvature. Volatility is not released, it is deferred. The 20-period moving average continues to hold flat as price oscillates narrowly around it. This interaction shows repeated acceptance. Acceptance without expansion is the clearest sign of unresolved structure. Meanwhile, the 120-period moving average continues its gradual descent. Price is not moving toward it aggressively. Instead, time is bringing them closer together. This convergence is not driven by momentum. It is driven by inactivity. As the moving averages compress, their influence overlaps. Price can no longer clearly separate short-term behavior from long-term behavior. This overlap increases sensitivity to even small changes in participation. RSI reflects this condition again. There is no regime shift. Momentum drifts, reinforcing persistence rather than transition. Each session that passes without expansion increases internal pressure. Inactivity is not neutral. Persistence is always unstable. Now shift down one layer to the 15-minute chart. On the 15-minute time frame, volatility compression becomes even more visible. Individual candles show repeated rejection of range expansion while remaining accepted near the 20-period moving average. The short-term Bollinger Bands on the 15-minute chart mirror the hourly structure. They remain flat and narrow, indicating that lower timeframe volatility is aligned with higher timeframe compression. Price repeatedly tests the same micro-range without follow-through. This behavior is not noise. It is confirmation that structure is being respected across timeframes. The 15-minute RSI also reflects this condition. Momentum oscillates within a narrow band, never accelerating into a new regime. Lower timeframe momentum is subordinated to higher timeframe containment. This alignment matters. When lower timeframes compress inside higher timeframe compression, resolution becomes dependent on time rather than trigger. As compression continues, structure becomes heavier without becoming clearer. Price remains accepted within the same overlapping references. The long-term Bollinger Band does not widen. The short-term Bollinger Band does not separate. The moving averages continue converging. Not because price is choosing, but because time is narrowing the system. This is a critical distinction. Nothing here suggests outcome. Everything here describes processing. From a structural observation standpoint, several hypothetical behaviors can be considered, without assigning probability or direction. If price remains accepted near the 20-period moving average, compression continues and dependency on time increases. If price temporarily moves away from the 20-period moving average but returns quickly, that behavior reinforces acceptance rather than transition. If volatility briefly expands on the 15-minute chart but fails to affect the hourly bands, that expansion is absorbed rather than resolved. These are not scenarios for action. They are descriptions of how structure might continue to process. What matters is not the movement itself, but whether movement is accepted or rejected by existing references. Key observation points remain unchanged. Watch how price interacts with the overlapping U.S. session anchors. Watch whether the Bollinger Bands maintain flatness or begin to curve. Watch whether moving average compression continues or stabilizes. Observe whether 15-minute volatility expands independently or remains constrained by the hourly structure. Each of these observations describes condition, not outcome. This is not indecision. Indecision would still involve range. This is containment through acceptance. When price remains accepted near overlapping session anchors, it inherits all unresolved pressure from those sessions. Nothing disappears. It accumulates. The market is not inactive. It is reorganizing internally. The longer this structure persists, the more dependent price becomes on time rather than distance. Movement is delayed, not canceled. This is why unchanged structure must continue to be narrated. Stability is never permanent. Persistence without expansion is itself a form of tension. As this hour continues, nothing resolves. Volatility remains stored. Acceptance continues without displacement. And the only thing that keeps changing is time itself.